Le Scott RC Pro in a size 56, coming in at 7.2 kilograms. That is all in. So that includes 2 water bottle cages, pedals, power meter, computer mount, all in. 7.2 kilograms. Dear Cycle Limited, I want to apologize to you guys in advance because you are literally going to have to take the Scott 4 frame set out of my cold, dead hands. For 5 years of doing this channel, I have been on the hunt. The hunt has been for me to find what is my favorite or the best aero bike that I can possibly ride. I've ridden everything from $600 frames all the way up to $5,500 frame sets. And I've ridden everything from giant propels to tarmac SL late frame sets. And I think we have finally answered the question to what is going to potentially be my favorite aero bike of all time. Scott Foil RC Pro. It's stiff, it's aero, it's relatively lightweight, and your boy Patty has been riding this for the last couple of weeks. So in this video, we're going to be going over some of the specs, the details on this bike now that I finally have it built up, and I'm also going to be giving you some of my thoughts on this now that I've ridden it for the past couple of weeks. Huge shout out to Cycle Limited down in South Florida for sending me out this frame set. So without further ado, let's begin. Sheesh, this bike looks incredible. I would love to have it in the sun for you guys, but we're basically trying to counteract 2 things. Number 1 is we're fighting daylight now that it's fall and the sun sets like at 6 o'clock. And number 2 is we're trying to mitigate some of the crazy winds today here on the coast here in Chicago. And this will be a fantastic point about the wind because I'm going to address that with how the wind interacts with this bike. So Scott Foil RC Pro, we have this in a size large, size 56. For reference, I am 6 feet tall. I have a saddle to bottom backer drop of like around 78 centimeters, but let's talk about the specs. So first, let's talk about the cockpit. So I got the frame set from Cycle Limited. It was just the frame set alone option. There was no cockpit, no integrated cockpit, nothing like that. So this stem is from Scott. This is their Synchros. This is their in-house brand, and the stem on here is a 130 millimeter length, and then the degree on here is like a -10. And what's nice is it basically allows you to run all the cables nice and neat underneath the stem so that you can route it inside of the head tube. And it comes with this really nifty plastic cover as well as a little mount to keep the cables nice and tidy. And then moving over to the actual handlebars, these are my own handlebars. These are just basically from an in-house OEM supplier. I think they're from like Light Carbon, but we have 38 centimeters in the width, and then the hoods we have like 40 centimeters. And this is actually a bit surprising if you've been following my channel, because you know that I have been making the move to more narrow handlebars, but believe it or not, at 38 centimeters and then 40 in the drops, I get a lot of leverage and a lot of control and modularity with my steering and cornering, something that you want with a bike like this, since of course this bike is intended for racing. Moving over to the saddle, so as you guys know, this is my favorite design of all time. This is a Sella Italia SLR Boost, but this one is a little bit different than the standard one that I usually run that costs about $150 USD. This is the Envy version. So the difference on this one is a couple of different reasons. So number 1 is it uses titanium rails versus the metal composite that comes on the standard cheaper version. And number 2 is the material on the actual saddle and the padding is superior to the standard one. Number 1 is it's a lot smoother, so it doesn't rub or stick to your bibs, and it just gives you a lot more comfort. And not to mention the durability on this higher end version is much better than that standard version. Now I will say that this one is, despite the fact that this is probably like 60 grams lighter than the standard version, it is pretty expensive. I want to say it's probably like $250 to $300 USD, but it comes in at like 167 grams. Very comfortable, nice and smooth on the material tops, and very durable. Now, as you guys noticed, the seat post is a 0 millimeter. I'm usually run like a 15 millimeter setback one, but this one comes with a 0. I think that's just stock from Scott. So I've had to move my saddle pretty far backwards. I'm basically toward the end of the saddle, but that's okay because again, just based on the geometry and the design of this bike, this is intended to be slightly more saddle forward, but I still basically set this up one-to-one to all of my road bikes as far as my saddle setback as well as my saddle height. And then moving over to the group set, sorry for the sun flare guys, we are chasing daylight right now, but we are rocking my tried and true Shimano Ultegra Di2 12 speed. So we have 5236 crank in the front, and then in the rear we have a Dura-Ace cassette, super light. We have an 11 to 30 cassette. As far as the power meter running, I'm running my very accurate Magine TEO spider-based power meter that includes the carbon crank arms. And then the length of the carbon crank arms is 170 millimeters in length. And I did recently drop a video on this particular power meter. I believe the retail on it is like $549 USD, but it is exceptionally accurate, guys. Exceptionally accurate. I've compared it against my indoor smart trainer, and the numbers are absolutely spot on. Cycle Limited is your one-stop shop for new and pre-owned bikes, frames, wheels, and components. They are based in South Florida and are a family-owned operation that has really streamlined the buying and selling process, making it as straightforward and convenient as possible. One of the great things about Cycle Limited is they work directly with brand manufacturers to offer very competitive prices on new equipment. All of their inventory ships directly from the warehouse, so you don't have to wait for the individual sellers to package their bikes, ship to Cycle Limited, have Cycle Limited's professional mechanics inspect the bikes, and then send the bike to you, which could easily be a 2 to 3 week turnaround. Just like with my Ventum NS1, which was a lovely bike by the way, my Scott foil frame set was packaged exceptionally well and arrived here in Chicago in about 3 business days. So be sure to check out their website, and I do have a $75 off code, which can be used on orders of $500 or more. Now back to the video. And then moving on to the very spectacular conversation outside of the frame set itself is these wheels from XM Carbon Speed. So these are their flagship wheels. These are what they call the CS 56 Pro wheels. What's very interesting about these wheels, guys, is that's right, we are using titanium spokes as well as a Sapum alloy self-securing nipples. And we also have a nicely finished hub, both rear and the front. These are crazy light. These, we have 60 millimeters in the rear, and then we have 50 millimeters in the front. The internal width is like 24 millimeters, and then the external width on these is like 31 millimeters, which stretches out my Continental GP 5000 in the 28C size to around 30 and a half millimeters at the rim. But these come in for a set, these come in at around 1,250 grams. So very light considering the specs on these. And of course, given that these are metal spokes rather than carbon fiber, that's actually very incredible on the specs. And I believe the price point on these are going to either be like $1,500 or $1,600 USD, but they do come with a lifetime warranty from XM Carbon Speed. You're probably wondering, how can they offer a lifetime warranty considering that they are out in the Far East in China? But Peter over at XM Carbon Speed, he actually is working on getting his trademark official here in the United States. So he's trying to expand his business for 2026. I really look forward to what he's going to be offering in the coming months. So what's the big deal about using titanium spokes? So the first thing is titanium spokes, in theory, should be stronger and more durable and have a higher stress point than steel spokes. They should also be a little bit stiffer. They're not going to be as stiff or as light as carbon fiber spokes or like carbon aero spokes, but these are basically the Goldilocks between carbon fiber spokes as well as steel spokes. So these are lighter than steel, they're stronger, they have a higher stress point, they're a little bit stiffer than steel spokes, and then more comfortable than carbon spokes, although they're just slightly not as aero. And then of course we have my favorite rotors of all time. These are the Galfer Wave rotors. They're significantly lighter in weight compared to the Ultegra and even the Dura-Ace rotors, and the stopping power on these are fantastic. We have 140 mil in the rear rotor, and then in the front we have a 160. Next up, I want to briefly just talk about my overall bike fit on this Scott Foil RC Pro. So as you can see, the stem is slammed. The reason being is because when I got the frame set on loan from Cycle Limited, the frame was already slammed and I basically could not run any additional spacers. But believe it or not, just the way the geometry is set up on this bike, it actually has been surprisingly comfortable and surprisingly easy to get in a very aero yet comfortable and predictable position in the drops. And probably part of that is due to the fact that this is not the lowest stack bike that I've ever featured on this channel. And despite the fact that it is slammed, I am only using a 130 millimeter length stem, which I know you guys are probably laughing at me in the comments, versus some of the other stems I've used in the past at like 140 that usually tend to be more of a -12 degree, versus this is only -10. So all of these marginal changes compared to some of the other bike setups that I have in the past have made this surprisingly comfortable given the setup on this bike. We are out here, guys, in downtown Chicago. We are just adjacent to the Elder Planetarium. I used to go here to the planetarium when I was a kid in school. We would take several field trips here. It's a fantastic place. And guys, as much as I always say that summertime Chicago is definitely the time to come down to Chicago, fall, autumn in Chicago is absolutely fantastic. We have low 60s during the day. You're able to wear your Ugg boots, get yourself a pumpkin spice latte, and just really dive into all of the different things that downtown Chicago has to offer. Now, you're probably wondering, when it comes to dynamics, given that this is an aero race bike, the geometry is super aggressive, what is this bike actually like to ride with, given the fact that we are using titanium spokes? So let's go ahead and take this bike out on the road so I can give you some of my first initial thoughts on what it's like to ride the Scott Foil RC Pro. The first thing I want to discuss has to do with stiffness in relation to the riding dynamics of the Scott Foil RC Pro. So many customers have told me that when they first jumped on this bike, they were just surprised with how stiff this bike is, especially when you're riding over rough pavement or even just pavement that's just not exactly smooth tarmac. However, for myself, because I have ridden so many Chinese branded bikes, aero bikes at that matter, those bikes from the Chinese companies have been very stiff and even at times almost punishing. So for myself, hopping onto this bike, I was actually surprised with how comfortable it was in relation to those Chinese bikes. So if you are a consumer who is used to riding these super harsh Chinese bikes, you'll be happy to know that this bike is actually totally rideable on a day-to-day basis. You'll be able to do long endurance ride on this bike without it completely punishing your neck and your back. The second thing I want to discuss is again with stiffness, but this is in relation to how this bike accelerates and just how immediate this feeling that you get on this bike when you go to stomp on the pedals. You figure the way this bike is designed, it is an aero bike. It has a chunky head tube and has a really chunky bottom bracket area. The immediacy on this bike when you hop and stomp on the pedals is instant. It's instant. The only other bike that comes close to this that I have featured on this channel has probably been the Giant Propel Advance Pro. That bike is also very stiff, but I would say that bike is a little bit more harsh than this one is. Somehow, maybe the way this bike is designed, the carbon layup, just the geometry, and all of these are the small things that Scott has taken into consideration. This bike somehow is able to offer a performance when it comes to acceleration that is basically unmatched, while also being not as harsh and punishing as those Chinese brands. The next thing I want to discuss in relation to just how this bike is designed has to do with crosswind stability. Now that we are here in fall/autumn in Chicago, living on the lakefront, you basically always have winds coming from all different directions, whether it's a headwind or a crosswind or a cross tailwind. There's always winds coming from somewhere. And unfortunately for this bike, because of the design with that chunky head tube and just a really overall aggressive looking bike, this bike is not the best when it comes to crosswinds. In fact, I would say I probably would not recommend any set of wheels on this bike that are deeper than 60 millimeters deep, and that's irrespective of how much you weigh. I would say in terms of crosswind stability, the king of that, the one that reigns supreme, is probably the Tarmac S08. So just keep that in mind, guys. If you live somewhere where it's flat, maybe a little bit of rolling terrain, this bike will be good. But if you live anywhere where there's a lot of climbing or it's really windy, you will have to think twice to this frame. And then speaking of climbing, I would say that while this bike is very stiff, if you do live somewhere with a lot of climbing, I don't think that this would be the best choice for that. Again, this is really designed for all-out flat terrain, and I would say this is probably comparable with the Giant Propel as far as climbing capability, and I would probably give the slight edge to the Giant Propel. The next thing I want to talk about are these wheels in relation to this frame. So again, guys, these wheels on here are titanium spoke wheels from XM Carbon Speed, and I did get a chance to ride this bike with carbon spoke wheels as well. It definitely was a little bit more of a harsher ride, so if you do plan to run carbon spokes with this frame, just know that it will be even more stiffer than it already is, but you will lose a little bit of comfort unless you plan on running, say, 32C tires ran tubeless. But I'd say that these titanium wheels paired with this frame is actually a really good setup because you do get a little bit more comfort compared to carbon spokes, but then they are slightly stiffer than steel spokes. And so you get sort of this Goldilocks feel. And then being that it is 60 in the rear, 50 in the front, I think that is a perfect balance between aerodynamics and comfort that just pairs really nicely with this bike. But overall, guys, I would say this bike has been fantastic. It is incredibly fast. I don't have any data metrics to prove that it's faster than any of the other premium bikes that I have featured on this channel, but this bike is a lot of joy to ride. One of the only main negatives I have for this bike so far is just the fact that this bike always wants to go fast. If you're trying to do a recovery ride or like a zone 2 ride, it's going to be really difficult for you to do that because every single pedal stroke, anytime you're putting down a little bit of power, this bike just wants to go, go, go. It's an aero bike. It's a race bike, so it's intended to go fast rather than noodling around here in Chicagoland. So that is gonna wrap up today's video, guys. Once again, huge shout out to Cycle Limited for sending me out this frame set. This bike as a whole is absolutely fantastic, guys. It's super fast in a straight line. It's pretty good in the crosswinds. It's super stiff, yet somehow it's very, very behaved over rough pavement. This is the belle of the ball, guys. I really don't know where to go from here because this bike is just that good. It's just a shame that we are approaching the end of the outdoor riding season because I wish that I could test and keep reviewing this bike for the next 6 months. Maybe that means I might have to make a trip down to South Florida or maybe take a trip out to the West Coast in LA. But I'm gonna leave the video at that, guys. Questions, comments, and concerns, please feel free to leave them down below, and I'm gonna check you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.